love when your message gets bigger and smaller right in front of you and you're ready to read it. Technology is a great thing. I'd like to introduce one of our own today. Keith has been a member of Kiwanis since 2001. Been a regular attendee of the clubs with his dad since 1979. He's lived in Medina all of his life, with the exception of his years at Ohio State. Didn't find out exactly how long that was.
It was a little over 4.
He's been the finance director of this wonderful city for 20 years. He's married to his wife, Fiona, and she's also a Kiwanian, if you didn't know that. Have 2 wonderful children, Bryson, who's 2.5, and Magnolia, who's 11 months. So let's welcome Keith in our normal Kiwanis way.
I'm doing very well. Thank you, everybody. It's kind of, I wanted to do this program for a couple reasons. I think it's kind of cathartic for me after dealing with Dad's dementia, but it's also something that, and I'll get to some facts and figures later in the presentation, Alzheimer's and dementia are surprisingly common, and a lot of people have to deal with these things. And I've got it on one of the slides later, but I'll say it now. Something that somebody said to me a long time ago was, nobody tells you how to raise your parents. And so I thought going over some of these things would be helpful for anybody who has to deal with this with a parent, a spouse, whatever the case may be, because the facts and the statistics say that a decent percentage of you eventually will have to deal with this with a close family member. This is, on this slide I have my dad's kind of, his kind of theme, I guess. This was something he said all the time. He said, enjoy every day and try to make the world a little better place for your having been here. The first half of it, enjoy every day, is something that's really important, dealing with a loved one with Alzheimer's, and I'll get to that in a few slides. The second half, I really think whenever we read our Kiwanis defining statement, improving the world one child and one community at a time, I think make the world a little better place for your having been here is just my dad's way of saying that. So, first I want to talk about some early signs of Alzheimer's and dementia. And these are important to watch for because the medications that they have for this disease, they don't make the disease go away. They don't make it get better. They don't even stop it from getting worse. All they do is slow down the progression of it. And it's important to be on those as soon as you can because you want to slow down that progression as soon as you can. I know we took my dad to our regular family doctor when he was a little over 70, and we told him, you know, Dad's been doing some things and we'd like to check it out. And I don't remember the name of the test, but the medical professionals all have a standard test that they give. And when he got done, he came back to talk to us, and my question to the doctor, I said, is this just what 70 is? But it doesn't seem like it to me, because I know people that are 70 that are still doing a job like mine, and I'm looking at where Dad is, and he couldn't do that. And the doctor's answer at that time, he said, look, he said, if your dad were 85 or 90, I'd probably look at this result and say, well, he's 85 or 90. But this result at your dad's age is a little concerning, and then we went down the road of diagnosis and so on. But some of those early signs and you know, just things to watch for, a lot of it is things that all of us can do, but they just became more frequent. And I have a picture here of a person putting up a screen door. The reason is because one that sticks with me, I remember my dad doing this. If you've ever put up a screen door, and I'll give you a little pro tip here for putting up a screen door. If you put a screen door on your house, you get it from the Home Depot or whatever, and they're set up from the factory that they can swing either way and all this different stuff, and then you have to put it together. When you get the door, what you're tempted to do is take it, look at your front door, and then turn around and set it down here. Don't do that. The reason is because when you turn it around, then every time as you're working on it, you have to flip the image of it in your head as you turn back and forth, and it's really easy to screw that up. So what you want to do instead is take a few steps back, set it down, Now you're looking at the door the same way the door is going to face, so it's a lot easier to say, okay, I want the hinges on the left, you don't have to spin it, etc. So Dad had called me, and I was out with Deanna, and he said, you know, I've got this screen door, and I'd like you to come help me finish putting this up. It was at one of the rentals. I said, okay, fine, I'll be over in a little while. And I told Deanna, I said, don't worry, this is only going to take like 5 minutes. Because the only part of this job that actually takes 2 people is when you're done and you're ready to attach it, you need one person to hold the door in place while the other one puts all the screws in going around it. And that's all I figured Dad needed. So I showed up, and Dad had screwed this door up 6 ways to Sunday. The closer was on the outside, the latch was backwards, the hinges, everything about this door was wrong. And I mean, I sit here and tell you how to put up a screen door. I know this because he taught me. You understand? I mean, it's not like he didn't do it. And I thought at the time, I thought, well, you know, maybe he just got in a hurry. Maybe he didn't follow my tip. Maybe he turned around and put it, and then it was backwards in his head, or, you know, whatever. But like I said, as the dementia got worse, those kinds of things happened more and more. So it wasn't so much things that, you know, I could have screwed up that door too if I'd have been in too big of a hurry and so on. Stuff that anybody could do, but it was like, this is happening a lot. I remember we were working on a project in the wood shop, and Dad built a bunch of stuff backwards. If you've built stuff, you've probably built one backwards at some point in your life. I mean, it's easy to make a mirror image of what you wanted, but it was, like I said, it was more frequent. So watch for things like that. Some of this presentation is very sad and so on, because it's the nature of the disease. You go through this with a loved one, and there's going to be very tough times. I have this picture up of the hospital because one of the times that I remember, I took Dad to the emergency room, and this wasn't even the last time, but I took him to the emergency room, and they weren't, because of the pandemic, they weren't allowing guests in the emergency room, but I had to explain to him that I had to go back there because he wouldn't I wasn't even sure if he'd be able to tell them his name, let alone would he know what pills he was on and all of that kind of thing. And a little tip that I did want to throw in there. One thing that my brother and I did, we made a Google sheet of Dad's medications, because anytime you take somebody to the hospital, the first question they ask you is, what medications are they on? And the first few times I took him to the hospital, I was like, well, he takes like a vitamin. You know, I mean, you have no idea. If you're not familiar with Google Sheets, I mean, take a picture with your phone of the list of medications that your loved one is on, so that if you have to go to the hospital and they say, and I will tell you that the ER nurses were really impressed when they said, what medications is he on? And I pulled out my phone, handed him a sheet that had the name spelled right, the dosage size, the how often, you know, everything was on it. Here you go. You know, it was really helpful because I couldn't, you know, he was on so many different medications. It was like 10 or 12 medications, none of which I can pronounce. There's no way I could do this list off the top of my head. Plus, it's changing all the time as the doctors are changing stuff up. By having it as a Google sheet that's accessible from your phone, we can get to it anywhere. So that's a good tip. But my tough times. So I was in the emergency room. Dad had gone back, and then I was explaining to them that, yeah, I know your policy is you don't allow visitors, but I have to be there. I'm the power of attorney. He's not going to be able to answer your questions. They finally decided, yeah, you need to be there. So the lady said, okay, well, you can go back, and he's in bed 11. And then she started to tell me where bed 11 was, and I looked at her and I was like, yeah, I know. That's the point I had gotten to with the Medina emergency room. I didn't need her to tell me where bed 11 was because I knew the layout of the Medina emergency room. I'm not a medic, I'm not a doctor, I've never worked in the hospital, and I know exactly where all the beds in the emergency room are because I've been there so many times that's, you know, where we are. Another, you know, the things that they forget. You know, my mom called me one night. She had a really hard time accepting that he had dementia, that this was a disease and that it wasn't going to get better. She kept thinking if we remind him enough times, he'll remember what he's supposed to do, or, you know, it was just hard for her to accept it. But she called me one night and she was crying, she was dealing with issues, and she said he pooped on the floor. And Dad had gone into the bathroom and didn't know where he was supposed to sit. He just didn't know. And I was sitting at home, and Deanna could hear the call, and I was like, I got to go over there and take care of this. And she kind of turned up her nose, and I looked and I said, you know, Dad changed lots of my diapers. You know, I said, most people don't get to pay that back. I mean, you know, that's just how I'm going to look at it. because, you know, it is what it is, and that's what we're going to do. But that's the kinds of, I mean, you don't expect people to forget. You know, without knowing much about Alzheimer's, you expect that people are going to forget names and they're going to forget things like that. You don't realize that also they're going to forget how to eat, they're going to forget how to go to the bathroom, they're going to forget how to bathe themselves, they're going to forget their balance gets off because they're going to forget how to walk, things like that. And there's more I'll talk about. I mean, it's a difficult disease to deal with. Good days, bad days. I think most people that have had someone go through Alzheimer's will tell you this. You get to a point where the bad days are better than the good days. And that sounds really strange, so I'm going to explain it. But on my dad's bad days, he had no idea what was going on. But we could give him like one of Bryson's toys, and he was happy. Because he didn't know what was going on, but he was playing with a toy, and he was happy. On his good days, he had an idea of what was going on, but then he was mad because he was mad that he knew that he didn't know the stuff that he used to know. And it's a really weird situation to be driving over to my parents' house and you're like hoping that he's having a bad day. And then you feel guilty for that because you feel like, well, I don't want him to have a bad day. I want him to have a good day so I can like maybe kind of have a conversation with him. Except I know that if I can, that conversation is going to be him being mad that he's where he is. So, you know, you're happier if they're having a bad day and you can give them a toddler's toy and they're happy. As opposed to if they're having a good day, you know, they're frustrated, they're mad, they're swearing, and personality changes. When I mentioned the swearing, people's personalities will change. It does happen. This is something that I will tell you. The Alzheimer's Association as a fundraising slogan uses searching for the first Alzheimer's survivor. You may have seen that on some of their literature for their walks and so on. And I don't think that really hit me until the end or towards the end with Dad. The brutal reality of this disease is we could have a year's worth of these programs, and it wouldn't be hard to find that many people who've been through this. We could have a year's worth of these programs of people telling you about their experience taking care of a loved one with Alzheimer's, and you know where this journey ends, and that's the second picture here. Every one of those stories ends at the corner of Spring Grove and Route 18 because there isn't you know, I know people who survived cancer. My dad lived 20-some years after he had his first heart attack. My father-in-law had a heart attack like 30 years ago. He's still around. I don't know anybody that survived Alzheimer's, and neither do you, because it hasn't happened yet. That is like I said, just it's the horrible, it's the brutal reality of this disease is when you start down this road, it's gonna end in a cemetery because there isn't any other way out of this. I mean, like I said, there's people that survive cancer. There aren't people that survive Alzheimer's. It keeps going until it gets bad enough and then they die. There isn't another way out of Alzheimer's. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Grandpa. Happy birthday to you. So I apologize for my poor singing. The reason I put this here, I have this slide called the Alzheimer's Depression Trap. And I put the birthday video here because birthdays are really when you notice days that stand out. Birthdays, your birthday, their birthday, Christmas, things like that. Those are the days when you really notice how much this disease is progressing. On a day-to-day basis, you don't notice it because on a day-to-day basis, they kind of have ups and downs anyway. So when they hit a new low, you never know if that's just where they are now or if today's just a bad day and tomorrow we will be back ahead of that. But when you look at it on a year-to-year basis, you can say, wow, this has really gone downhill. And you know, today's August 12th. My dad was alive a year ago today, and if you ask me how he was doing on August 12th, I have no idea, because I don't remember what I was doing on August 12th. But that video is from September 5th of last year. That was his 80th and last birthday, and I know exactly how he was doing because we had a birthday party over at Deanna's and my house. My brother and his kids were down. Mom and Dad came over, and I know how he was. I talk about the Alzheimer's depression trap, and I told you on the first slide I was going to refer back to that where my dad always said, enjoy every day. This is really important when you're dealing with a loved one with Alzheimer's, because it's very easy to fall into this trap where you're always comparing to how things were, not to how they're going to be. So every year, you know, on Dad's 77th birthday or 76th, you can look and say, man, he was so much better on his 75th. And you give your right arm to get back to where you were a year ago, and it's easy to be depressed because you don't have what you had a year ago. And so the most important piece of advice I can give you on dealing with a loved one with Alzheimer's is enjoy what you have while you have it. Because once this disease starts, it gets worse. It inexorably gets worse. And you may only have 20 minutes with your wife or your mom or your dad or your whatever, and you may think that's terrible, but believe me, 6 months or a year from now, when you only have 5 minutes, you wish like crazy you could have that 20 minutes back, and you can't because it's gone. Enjoy that 20 minutes when you have it. Don't be sad about not having the hour you used to have. When you get down to where you've only got 5 minutes or 30 seconds at a time, enjoy those 5 minutes or those 30 seconds because they're going away, and enjoy what you have while you have it. That's my biggest piece of advice, because like I said, it's very easy to fall into this depression trap because you're comparing to where you were, and it's always getting worse, and it's easy to be depressed because it keeps getting worse. But you need to enjoy what you have, because when it's gone, it's gone. This was something that somebody said to me. Nobody tells you how to raise your parents. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm in both pictures. That's the clue. So really, the best training you have for dealing with somebody with Alzheimer's as a practical matter is raising little kids. And that's why I put this picture here, because that's me as a baby with my dad, and then that's me as a dad holding baby Bryson. And you know, one example that I can think of is on that 80th birthday slide that I just showed you. We had that all planned out, and then my mom called, and Dad didn't want to come. And I don't know if I don't know, but he didn't want to come. And my brother went over there, because they were on the way down anyway. My brother went over there, and what my brother said afterwards was he just talked to him like he talked to his little 2-year-old Jacob. He said, okay, Dad, get your coat on, we're going to this party. You don't ask a 2-year-old if they want to go to dinner. You tell the 2-year-old to get their shoes on, and we're going to dinner. And that's just what you have to do. Because the reality of it is, I mean, you know, like I had that with Kiwanis a lot of times. I'd go to pick him up for Kiwanis. Well, I don't want to go to Kiwanis. Well, I know he wants to go to Kiwanis. I know he wants to be here with his friends, and I know he wants to spend some time with me. I know he does. So, you know, you don't go over there and say, hey, Dad, do you want to go to Kiwanis? You go over there, all right, Dad, get your boots on. We're going to Kiwanis, you know, and that's the biggest thing. But there's a lot of things with raising little kids where you find using those same things. And I have an example of that happened here. And this is, it's amazing. The one that I remember the most, where it was a similarity to raising little kids, I will never forget this one because it happened, I don't think it was the same day, but it was within a week. I was getting my son Bryson dressed, and I don't mean to discount my daughter Magnolia. She's just too young to have really been the comparison for any of these, so that's why I'm talking about Bryson. But I was getting Bryson dressed, and I pulled his shirt over his head, and anybody who's raised infants knows this. You know, when they're infants, you pull the shirt over their head, then you grab their hand, and you say, okay, we're putting your hand through the armhole, and you put it through the armhole. Well, I pulled his shirt over his head, and Bryson, my little, wasn't even 1 yet, he reached up to put his hands through the armholes. And the look on his face, he wasn't really talking much, but the look on his face told me more than he could have said in a 10,000-word essay. I mean, he was just so happy and so proud of himself. Dad, I did it. I put my hands through the armholes. And that's that's probably the greatest experience in life, to be a part of that with a child, of them learning and them growing. And then the juxtaposition here is one of the worst experiences in life. Same week, I brought Dad to Kiwanis. So we had home health aides. They got him dressed and ready to go. So I get over there. He's ready. Get him in the car, bring him to Kiwanis. We get done with the meeting. I go out in this hallway out here. And I'd learned I needed to get my coat on first before I worked on his. So I put my coat on, I grabbed his coat, and I held his coat up, and he had no idea what to do. He didn't know how to put his arms through the armhole. And I'm just looking at him, and you just want to cry. I mean, you're just looking at him like, Dad, I have this tiny child at home who knows to put his arms up to get him through the armholes. And here the guy who, to jump back a slide, here the guy who brought me home from the hospital, changed my diapers, taught me to ride a bike, he doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't have any idea of what to do when I hold the coat up. He just doesn't know. And the difficult thing about that is I was standing right out here in the hallway. When this happens, you have two choices. You can either sit there and cry, which is what you kind of want to do, or you can pull out what I call my Bryson voice, and I'm sure everybody calls this their, whatever their kid's name is, voice. You pull out your Bryson voice, you say, okay, Dad, give me your arm. We're gonna put your arm through the armhole, and you talk to them. But here's the weird thing about that. Everybody understands that that's sad. What you don't think of before you deal with this is, it's not just that it's sad. It certainly is, but it also feels wholly inappropriate. You understand? I mean, to use that voice, it's one thing when you use that voice with a 2-year-old. How can I talk to this man who taught me all these things? How can I talk to him like a baby? And the problem with that choice, like I said, you can either do that or cry. The problem with the cry option is when you're done crying, you're still going to have to pull out your Bryson voice because the coat is not going to jump onto them while you're doing that. I mean, it's just not. You're going to have to talk to them like a 2-year-old and say, here, give me your hand. We're going to put your hands through the armholes. And then you have to do it. It's the only thing you can do. You're not going to be able to, get the coat on and get home without doing that. And that's, like I said, the comparison, the juxtaposition of Bryson learning this and my dad forgetting it at the same time is just one of the most surreal experiences of my life, to have such a great experience and such a terrible experience with essentially the same skill at the same time. It's very strange. I have some facts and figures from the Alzheimer's Association. There's more than 6 million Americans living with Alzheimer's. And I do want to say something about that. There are more people today with Alzheimer's than there used to be. And that sounds bad, but it's actually a good thing, because it's actually because we're all living longer. I mean, when I look at my dad, okay, his father died of heart disease at age 60. His dad never got Alzheimer's. My dad had a heart attack at 60, and if it would have killed him, which it probably would have with the medicine that was around when his dad was 60, then he wouldn't have got Alzheimer's. So the reason that more people get this today is because less people today die of heart disease and breast cancer and things like that used to be, a lot of medical conditions today were a death sentence 40, 50 years ago, and now it's like an outpatient surgery. My dad, he got a bunch of stents put in. He never even had the rib cage cracked. They just were able to go in and put stents in. It's an outpatient surgery. We got an extra 20 years of my dad. And the last 10, he had Alzheimer's. The last 10 or so, the last 3 or 4 were pretty rough. But, I wouldn't trade it for not having those years at all. So, I mean, like I said, it's a good thing. It's because it's not because Alzheimer's is more prevalent in general. It's because there's more old people, because we're not dying of things that used to kill us. But Alzheimer's kills more people than breast and prostate cancer combined. In 2021, these are from the Alzheimer's Association, by the way. Alzheimer's and other dementias will cost the nation $355 billion. And they say that over 11 million people are providing unpaid care for somebody with Alzheimer's. And that doesn't surprise me at all. It's almost 2 for each person that has it. And that sounds about right to me. It doesn't surprise me a bit. You have to care for them. This is a very important slide. I used to say this was the most important thing. I've changed my mind. The most important thing is to enjoy every day, but this is probably the second most important thing to know if you have a relative with Alzheimer's. I'm going to tell you that my family did not do a good job of this. We should have taken Dad's driver's license away a lot sooner. The reason I have Milo in this picture is, this is Milo. He lives up the street from my parents. He rides his bicycle up and down the street. I am not going to sugarcoat this. Taking my dad's driver's license away was a horrible experience. I mean, you all knew my dad. I bet most of you never heard him swear. My dad was the kind of guy who would swear maybe once a year. And then we took his driver's license away, and I heard him swear more when we did that than I did the whole time I was growing up. I mean, and most of the ones when I was growing up I deserved. It was awful. It was terrible. But the thing is, when you get to the point where you think, gee, maybe mom or dad or whoever shouldn't be driving anymore, I'm gonna tell you right now, when you think maybe they shouldn't, yeah, they shouldn't. You should have taken their driver's license away a long time ago. And the bottom line is, you know, I didn't sugarcoat it, it's gonna be a terrible experience. It's not about you, it's not about them, it's about Milo. Because I would go through that experience with Dad of taking his driver's license away 10,000 more times rather than go through the experience of Dad ran over Milo, and I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, I probably should have taken his keys away a long time ago. That'd be on me, and I'm just glad we didn't have to deal with it. And I've told this story to a lot of you before, but they are not going to recognize it. The best example of that I have is not long after we took his license, I took him to the cardiologist's office. We were in the waiting room. He was cold, so he'd kept his coat on. He finally decided he was warm enough to take his coat off, so he stood up and he took his coat off. And he was ranting and raving, because this was right after we took his driver's license away. I mean, swearing, that MFing doctor, on and on. It was bad about how crazy it was that he couldn't drive. And he took his coat off, and he had a hanger in one hand and the coat in the other hand, and he couldn't figure out how to put the coat on the hanger. So mid-sentence, he's ranting and raving, swearing about how crazy it is he can't drive. Mid-sentence, he turns to me, he hands me the coat and the hanger, he says, here, you do this. And he keeps right on going about how crazy it is he can't drive. And I'm just looking at him, and I'm like, I'm not laughing at my dad, it's just this situation. You can't operate a coat hanger. And you think that you should be behind the wheel of a 9,000-pound four-wheel drive truck that we push snow with. No. And that's the thing, like I said, when you reach this point, it's not about you and what you're going to go through pulling their driver's license away. It's not even about the patient and what they're going to go through when you pull their driver's license away. It's about Milo. Because you don't want on your conscience to know, yeah, I should have taken Dad's keys, I didn't, and now Milo got run over. You don't want to carry that. Deal with the ranting and raving. And I have a few tips that I'm going to get to on the next slide. This I want to thank my neighbor for. This ended up solving our driver's license problem. Deanna's and my neighbor George, his wife had Alzheimer's, and he gave us this tip, and I thought, that's ingenious. Why didn't I think of it? His wife kept wanting keys for the house, but then she kept losing the keys for the house, and George didn't really want like 10,000 keys for his house floating around the neighborhood every place that she lost them. So he finally went down to Walmart, and he went to that bucket next to the key machine, and he just grabbed a handful of crap keys that they had and took them home. And every time his wife said she wanted a key for the house, he said, okay, and he gave her one of these blank keys. And I said, that's genius. I went to the lock shop at Albright's, and I said, I want a key for a Chevy Colorado, but I don't want you to cut it. And we gave him a blank key for the Colorado, and I gave him the fob because that he was still could operate the fob. So when I would take him to Qantas, he always wanted to go in his truck. So I would call him, and I'd ask him to start the truck, and he'd start the truck so he could start it, he could unlock it with the fob, but he couldn't drive because the key didn't work. And then we just didn't mention that he couldn't drive. And every once in a while he would call me and he'd say, I can't get my key to work in the truck. And I'd say, well, I'll come over and see if I can fix it for you. So I'd go over there and he'd hand me his key and I'd switch it to my key and put the key in. Well, it started, but I'm here, I'll just take it while I'm here anyway. And that's how we took care of it, and it was fine because he didn't know he couldn't drive. He had a key that he thought was legitimate, and he was fine. And part of that is another advice, and this is why I invited my pastor Henry. This is the cup of coffee as my, this was his advice. And it really helped to get this, honestly, it really helped to get this advice from a pastor. Henry had told me early on in this that, was it your mother-in-law? Your mom, okay. She wanted to go home. And we didn't really run into that with my dad until towards the end. And then when we did, he would say, I want to go home. And I really didn't know, like, if he knew he was dying and home was a spiritual thing, I want to go home, or if he was just in 1947 and he wanted to go to the house he grew up in on Spring. I have no idea what he meant by it. But he would say, I want to go home. And Pastor Henry's advice to me early on was, he said, they would tell her, they'd say, well, okay, Mom, here, have a cup of coffee, and then we'll go home. And it's important to do this, and like I said, it was helpful having that come from my pastor because, I mean, at the end of it, you're lying to him. You're not going to go home after the cup of coffee. But here's the thing. It is by far the best option available to you. If you argue with them, you're not going to win. If you were to win, they would forget 3 minutes later and it wouldn't matter anyway. And really all you're going to do is aggravate them because the best case scenario is that they're going to realize, oh yeah, I am home. Well, I'm so dumb for wanting to go home. And then they're just going to be mad. So you're much, much better off to just say, okay, we'll go home. Here, have a cup of coffee and then we're going to go home. Or, you know, we did this with my dad. Well, we're going to go home tomorrow morning. We got to pack up and stuff. And that's just how we put it off. It still feels sad and inappropriate, but when you look at the alternatives, it's vastly better than anything else you could come up with. And while I'm on the subject of him wanting to go home, and I wasn't sure if he meant his house on Spring Grove Street, one thing my dad did to me, because he would be in different decades sometimes. I think most people have heard that with people with Alzheimer's. He pulled one on me once that I was really confused by, and then I finally figured it out. So my dad said to me, he said, I want to go to the restaurant next to the post office. I'm thinking, there's no restaurant by the post office. And then I thought, well, wait, okay, when he was young, the post office was the federal building. But, no, it actually wasn't. You're close, but no. So I thought, okay, well, he's thinking of the post office as the federal building, but I said, there's no restaurant next door to it because what's now Sully's was the auto parts when that was the post office. And then finally it dawned on me. He did like to go to Sully's. He was in 2 decades at one time. When he said the post office, he was in 1950 and he was talking about the federal building there at the corner of Elmwood and Liberty. When he said he wanted to go to the restaurant next to it, he was in the 2000s and wanted to go to Sully's. It was so confusing for me because he was in 2 decades at one time. I mean, I was accustomed to him being in the 50s or being in the 70s or whatever, not accustomed to him somehow getting it confused to where he was in 2 decades at once. Another thing, and I'm sorry I left this out on my There Will Be Tough Times. If you're the spouse, this is something that can happen, and this would be absolutely horrible. My dad was in rehab at a place up in Garfield Heights for a couple of weeks after we had some issues. And it was it was a dementia unit, memory care unit. And there were several of these there, couples. Both sides of the couple were married, but they didn't remember that. And so they had a boyfriend, girlfriend at the place because they didn't know that they were married. And I can't imagine, you know, you go in to see, because part of the difficulty of this disease is, you know, this is the guy who raised you, or this could be the beautiful girl you asked to marry you, or this could be the handsome man who asked you to marry him, you know, and to see them this way, but let alone to be the spouse and to go to see them and there they are sitting with somebody because they don't remember that they're married to you and that they don't remember any of it. They just don't know. It's a terribly sad thing to have to deal with, but it happens, and just understand that that's, you know, they don't know. They don't know. I have a reminder here. Remember the primary caregiver. This is something I did for my mom, and it's another example of this being a lot like raising little kids. You know, on Mother's Day here this year, Deanna got a card from Bryson and Magnolia. And obviously Bryson and Magnolia did not drive down to the store and buy a card and write their names in it. I did that for them. And I'm sure that in 1976, 1977, my mom got a Mother's Day card from Keith, and I didn't drive down to the store and get it and write my name in it, but Dad did that for me. So when he didn't remember Mom's birthday and their anniversary anymore, Mom got a card. Because I went and got a card and had him sign it, and then when we got beyond that, I just wrote Dick in it. I actually thought about this the other day because their anniversary was July 1st, and this year would have been their 49th anniversary. And Dad was really looking forward to that fair pass. So he'd be really disappointed to know he didn't get it, but so he would have been up next year. And I know a number of you have introduced, I remember Hank introducing his parents when they had their 50th anniversary. And I remember some other people have done that, and that was something I thought I'd get to do, but we didn't quite make it. But anyway, and Dad's joke, he would always tell this joke. Every year on his anniversary, he would come up and say, I have a happy dollar for, he would say, like 46 years of wedded bliss. And then he'd say, and out of 49, that ain't bad. So that was one of his things. So anyway, that's all the slides I have. You know, I just focus on the enjoy every day. It's a terrible thing to go through. It is, but it's it does give you kind of the opportunity to pay back what you normally don't get to pay back, and enjoy whatever you have while you have it if you start down this road, because the horrible reality of it, like I said, is once you start down this road, those sands are going through that hourglass, and there's no getting them back. Terry's question, if you couldn't hear it, he said, you know, for the caregivers, when do you call it quits? When do you say we can't do this here anymore? That for us was really complicated by the pandemic. Had it not been for the pandemic, we would have probably had him in a memory care unit a lot sooner. The reason we didn't was because my brother has 3 kids and I have 2, and the oldest is Lily, who's 6. And in the pandemic, they weren't letting kids into the nursing homes, which meant if we put Dad in a memory care unit, he never sees his grandkids again. You understand? I mean, he's not going to see them again. And some places had like a thing where they'd get him in a wheelchair and roll him out to the door or something. You could go over and wave, but it was winter, and it's like, you know, how are we going to get 5 little kids dressed up in boots and, you know, it's just, the pandemic really, really complicated that decision for us. So I didn't delve into it because hopefully, if you're dealing with this in a few years, there's not a pandemic going on and you're in a different situation. Our situation was made immensely complicated by the pandemic. What we ended up doing as far as needing professional help, we ended up having 24/7 home health aides for the last year or so. Before that, we had health aides once in a while to give Mom a break, but I mean, eventually we just had to have them round the clock. And that was more expensive than putting him in a memory care unit, but we felt like, first of all, we were worried about the transmission of the pandemic in the memory care, because all through this pandemic, our biggest worry was Dad's so weak with all the other medical issues he has that we figured there's no way he'd survive if he got this COVID. And so we were very concerned about keeping him safe from that. And then we really wanted him to be able to see the grandkids. That was the most important thing to him. So, I mean, we kind of felt like putting him in a memory care unit where he can't see the grandkids anymore. I mean, as far as he's concerned, he'd rather be gone. I mean, in all honesty, I hate to say that, but that would have been his answer if he'd have been able to answer it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you.